Howdy, friends. Hope all is going well for you. We are nearing the end of the school year, and that means we are quickly approaching the end of this unit, which we have just not had a lot of time in as we talk about evangelism and engaging unbelievers, defending the faith, all of that. Now, I say that um, with a little bit of lament that there's a lot more that I would have liked to have gone through with you all, but I also am not too discouraged because a lot of the courses that you'll have upcoming with Mr. Slofer and Mr. D will cover a lot of this, especially in the area of apologetics and defending the Christian faith. And so I know that you'll get good training in years to come, and so I'll be able to rest at peace, um, even though this unit has been a little bit briefer for us in this class. So last week for our lecture, we went through what is evangelism and kind of talked about it in a general sense, and then we looked at two basic models of presenting the gospel, the good news. We looked at the four spiritual laws, and then we also looked at the redemptive narrative as well. And so two different ways to kind of package the same good news. Really, it's just coming down to there is a God. We have sinned against him, all of us, yet Jesus Christ, through his perfect obedient life, through his sacrificial death, through his conquering the grave and bringing about the possibility of everlasting life, and through his ascension and being seated at the right hand of the Father with all rule and dominion. That is the good news. And so the gospel, then gospeling, evangelizing, is presenting that good news in such a way that hopefully and prayerfully that unbelievers will repent and trust in Jesus for salvation. Everybody will make a decision about that good news. They will either submit to King Jesus, or they will rebel against him. But his kingdom is coming, and so we do not have the job of convincing people to become Christians. We have the job of presenting and proclaiming the good news and trusting that the Spirit of God will do a work in people's lives. And so we just need to remember what our job is and what our job is not in the role of salvation. Today and this week, we're going to start engaging with different worldviews, and not really even engaging with different worldviews, but rather outlining a paradigm on how to engage with people who have different worldviews than what we have in the Christian faith. And so last week, what is the good news that we proclaim? This week, how do we engage with people who have a different understanding of the world and of life? So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into our presentation. And so here we go. 4 questions and 3 tests, intro to engaging worldviews. Now the 4 questions and the 3 tests we'll talk about in the next slide a little bit on what we mean by that. But I do just want to say that is a way of engaging with competing worldviews that is presented by Ravi Zacharias. He is one of the great Christian thinkers and apologists of our day. Just truly a brilliant mind, has done incredible work around the globe at a number of college campuses defending the faith, and truly a name to be recorded in the Christian history books in years to come. And he is right now battling cancer, and has recently put out the announcement that the doctors have done all that they can. And so we just want to be praying for him as it seems that he will see his Savior face to face sooner than later. And what an encouraging thing that is, to think about how he has given his life to defend the goodness and the truthfulness of Jesus Christ and the gospel message, and now he'll see he'll get the blessing of hearing, "Well done, good and faithful servant." So yeah, just wanted to throw that out there. But he's done such a great work. He's been just a really huge influence in my life, especially as it regards interacting with tough questions that we have as Christians, but then also presenting why we believe what we believe to the rest of the world as well. So with that, let's go ahead and dive on into this next slide here. So some introductory remarks to get us started. Number one, we're talking about engaging worldviews. Here's the first point that we need to know. Everybody has a worldview. Everybody. Some people know it. Some people don't think about it. Some people, their worldview is bound up in their religion, whether that's Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, or even what really fits is the religion of atheism, or whatever their philosophical pursuit on the existence of the world and life. Everybody has it. Some people think about it. Some people are just kind of going through life and trying to avoid some of those questions, and would present maybe a little bit more of an agnostic perspective if you question them, saying, I don't really know, who can really know? And then let me just avoid really thinking through and processing that, because I just want to live my life right now and not think about those scary things that I don't know the answers to. And so some people try to avoid the worldview. Other people really press into it and own it and want to defend it, Christian or not. So a definition of a worldview. A worldview is one's understanding and belief about the nature of life and the universe that we live in. And so we'll go through the four main questions that every worldview has to answer, but that's a basic definition of what a worldview is. And this is important for us to note. Not all worldviews can be true. Some worldviews will disagree with that statement. Some worldviews will say that all roads can lead to the same destination of enlightenment, some general God, that Islam is on the road to this God, Christianity is on this road to this God, just moralism is on the road to this God, that we're all just kind of trying to find our own pathway to this next whatever higher being, higher truth, higher reality, whatever it is. So some worldviews will tell you that all worldviews can be true. However, that's a contradiction, because some worldviews will tell you that their worldview is exclusive. So Christianity would say that Jesus Christ is the only way to salvation. Islam would be an exclusive worldview. Judaism would be an exclusive worldview. And so Christianity cannot be true in that Jesus Christ is the only way. Islam cannot be equally as true. And so that would be a contradiction there. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And so the question comes, how do we test or discern the validity of any given worldview? If there's a number of different worldviews or understandings about life and about life and the universe, how can we know which one's right, which one's true, which one we should believe, which one we should stake eternity on? Because that's kind of a big deal, right? And so we're going to look at this, as I already mentioned, from Ravi Zacharias, his 3 tests and 4 major questions for each worldview. So let's begin by taking a peek at the 3 tests, and we'll look at those, and then we'll say, we'll go through the 4 questions with those tests in mind. So here we go. The first test. Is it logically consistent? Is the worldview logically consistent? This is to say that a worldview cannot violate the law of non-contradiction. Don't freak out. This isn't a tremendously complex thought to understand. Here's what the law of non-contradiction is. It essentially says that something cannot be both A and not A at the same time, to use some variables. Let's put a little bit of flesh on it and look at some examples. Here's one example of the law of non-contradiction, that something cannot both be A and not A at the same time. Example one, a chair cannot be both blue and not blue at the same time. That would be a contradiction to say that it is blue and that it is not blue at the same time. Here's another example to maybe take it into the worldview realm. Jesus cannot be both the only way and not the only way. He must either be or not be the only way. But Jesus cannot be the only way to heaven and then also have many roads to heaven, because that would mean that he's not the only way. And so you have a contradiction here to say that Jesus is the only way, which is what the Bible affirms, and to say that Jesus is not the only way, which is what a popular voice would suggest right now from other worldviews, and which is seeping into those who would fall under the banner of Christianity. And so we need to know our Bibles well, to make sure that we're not contradicting what the Bible clearly says. So there we go. Test number one, is it logically consistent? If we have a contradiction, then we don't have a logical consistency. Is it empirically adequate? Big word, because Ravi Zacharias is brilliant. Here's what it means. A worldview must match what we see in creation. Let me give you an example. There were some mythical beliefs of, I think it was a Southeast Asian people group that we have found documents that suggest that their belief was that the world was flat, and that it was essentially riding on the backs of cosmic elephants, and that every step is what would make the earth shake or produce an earthquake. We know that that's not the case, because we've been in space and we've looked back at the earth and we've seen no cosmic elephants underneath. We've seen that the world is round. We understand tectonic plates and what causes earthquakes. And so that would be an example of a worldview belief that is not empirically adequate, as we have looked at the world. Now, it's also important to note, as we talk about empirically adequate, that means that the things that can be seen match up with what we believe about the things that can be seen. That's not to say that we don't also believe that there is a spiritual realm that cannot be empirically assessed, because it is spiritual in nature. It's not physical, and so therefore it cannot be viewed or tested according to an empirical method. And we also want to put in the caveat that we still believe that there's a creator who put design in place for the universe, but who reserves the ability and the power to supersede those normal design patterns. So, for instance, we see that in miracles. That's what a miracle is. The fact that waters would separate does not make sense scientifically, because God designed the universe for water to not do that kind of thing. Water will run together and flow together, and gravity will cause it to be even. But the miraculous is when God overrides those normal processes of science and will do something supernatural, meaning something that is above what is natural. So we still recognize that there is a spiritual realm, and we still recognize that God does miracles. But as we look at the normal processes and what can be seen observably, and we want to distinguish that there is a difference between scientific theory and scientific law as well. But as we see scientific laws, does that match up? Does that fit in harmony with what we believe in our worldview? Test number 3, is it existentially relevant? What we mean by this: a worldview must speak into how we actually live our lives. It must be relevant to the way in which we live as human beings. We fit into more often than many would like to admit, we fit into um, our design as being made in the image of God more than what we would give credit for. Let me give you an example of this. Let's look at the rising popular belief of naturalism, atheism. Uh, Atheistic naturalism, Darwinian evolution, that understanding, that worldview, would suggest that my goal in life, my purpose in life, is to live as long as possible and to procreate and to spread my genes as much as possible. That's what fits with Darwinian naturalism, which is an atheistic worldview, meaning no God. So if there's no God and there's nothing after my death, then I want to live as long as possible. That makes sense. And I want to spread my genotype as far as possible. That's the rules. That's why that's my goal in life right there, if I'm an atheistic naturalist. However, while there are a number of atheists and naturalists and pro-Darwinian evolution folks out there, they don't live according to that because it's not existentially relevant. It is not livable. And so, for instance, according to the philosophy of atheistic naturalism, you can't call what Hitler did objectively wrong. He is creating power for himself, and he is killing people that he believes is a threat to the spread of his genotype. According to what basis could I call what he did wrong if I'm an atheist? There is none. Outside of my subjective, oh, I don't think that was good, but who cares? If he thinks it is good and I think it's not good, why should he care that I think that he's wrong? And atheistic naturalism would have no problem with that. And here's where we see that the atheistic naturalism is not livable and is not existentially relevant. It doesn't really fit to our human existence. Is that the majority of atheists today would still say what Hitler did was wrong, even though they can't explain it according to their worldview. And here's what else we find. When you see a catastrophe, when you see some act of evil, whether it's the Las Vegas shooter, school shooting, everybody comes along and laments and mourns and says, this was wrong and this was should never have happened. Tell me why, if you're an atheist. Why is that wrong? If you don't believe there's any such thing as objective good or evil, if you can't call that wrong, and that just does not work. And that's where it's in those tragedies that are clearly, especially when they're clearly evil, we see that the atheists set aside what they believe on paper, and they start to fit in with who they are as humans, and they recognize that there is good and there is evil. And when they see evil, they recognize it. So that's obviously a longer conversation, and we could go down a number of paths with that. But those are essentially the three basic tests for every worldview. Can it be logical? Can it match up with what we see and observe? And does it really fit with how we live as humans? Is it a livable worldview? So let's go ahead and look at the four main questions that every worldview has to answer. Number one, the question of origin answers the question, where did everything come from? Our Christian response would be that a self-existent creator who had no beginning, who exists simply in his ontological nature, he simply is eternally self-existent, that this self-existent creator brought all things into being. That's what we believe. Compare that with an atheistic worldview and the cosmological argument. Modern science is in agreement, vastly in agreement, that the universe had a beginning. And so if everything that has a beginning had to have a cause, what was the cause of the universe? In no way, I'm sitting in my office right now, and it would not make any sense to me for a horse to appear in the middle of my office. If a horse is going to end up in my office, there needs to be a cause that brings a horse here, whether that's a mommy horse and a daddy horse, or whether that's somebody walking a horse up here, but a horse will not appear out of thin air. Okay, I think we can agree on that. And so the universe cannot appear out of thin air, excuse me. And so where did it come from? The Big Bang? Okay, well, like, was that stuff that went bang, was that eternal stuff that went bang and then created the universe? Does the Big Bang really satisfy the question of where things came from? I think there's a lot of gaps. I think there's a lot of faith being put in some Big Bang theory that is, quite frankly, requires more faith than believing that there is a self-existent creator who brought all things into being. So question 1, origin. Where did everything come from? Question 2, morality. It answers the question, what is right and wrong, or what is good and evil? The Christian response is that God has revealed his design for the perfect functioning and flourishing of his creation. We would call that good. We would see that in creation order, in Genesis 1 and 2. We would see that in the wisdom of God. We would see it in the law of God. We would see it in the commands of God. We would see it restored in the new heavens and the new earth in the book of Revelation. That we would say that is good. When we're living in accordance with God's design and will for us as human image bearers. Yet, sin is in this creation, and sin is the rebellion against that design. We would call that evil. So we have a category, we have an answer as Christians as to why there is good and evil, which is clearly observable. Again, even atheists will observe it, and that's why they will call things like a school shooting wrong. We as Christians, we know why it's wrong. The atheist worldview cannot tell you why it's wrong. There is no category for right and wrong. There's simply survival of the fittest. How can I live longer than other people? How can I spread my genes? There is no objective right and wrong in the naturalist atheist worldview. We have an answer for what is clearly perceived morality. If you are a skeptic, or if you know an atheist, go try and take their wallet from them, and when they stop you, ask them why they're stopping you. If they tell you it's wrong, ask them why it's wrong. There's not an answer. We as Christians, we have a response. We have a good response for morality, why it exists. Next one, purpose. So origin, where did everything come from? Morality, what is right and wrong or good and evil? Now purpose answers the question, why are we here? What is the meaning of life? Why do we exist? The Christian response, to quote the Westminster Catechism, to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. Our response is that there is a creator God, Trinitarian in nature, exalting and worshiping himself within the Godhead, yet choosing to create more and to invite more into this glorifying and enjoying his character and who he is. So our job is to glorify him through loving him, through living in his design, through loving one another and displaying his image on this physical earth, because God is spirit and he created humans to bear his image. And so we display, and we are a living portrait of who God is when we live the way he designed us to. And when we do that, we bring him glory. Destiny is the last one here. So where did everything come from? What's right and wrong? Why are we here? Destiny answers the obvious question: what happens next? When we breathe our last breath, when we die, what happens? And our Christian response is that there is either an eternity of union with or a separation from God. We believe biblically that when God gives us life, we are then eternal creatures forward. And so I will live here in this life a short amount of time, and unless Jesus comes back at some point, I will die. My soul will be with him until he makes all things new again. New heaven, new earth, and my soul will be rejoined with my body. And I'll live on this new earth with him forever in the right, good, perfect order of creation. Or for those who rebel against this God, who continue to live in their sin and do not receive the grace that comes through Jesus Christ, there will be an eternal separation from this God and from his good creation. We oftentimes refer to that as hell. It's the lake of fire, referred to in Revelation 20. And so we believe that we will either be with God or be separated from God, depending on if we have trusted in Jesus Christ and the salvation that he offers, the gospel. So, some concluding thoughts for us. Number one, Christians are not the only ones who have to defend our beliefs. It's important for us to remember that. Oftentimes we feel like we're increasingly the minority, and that we have this religious belief that doesn't line up with the popular opinion, and people are trying to stop us from praying in schools and burn our Bibles, and all this stuff is how we feel. And so we feel like we're always on the defense and always having to explain why we are Christians. And we are called to give an answer for the hope that we have, but we have to remember that we also have every right and responsibility to challenge the beliefs of others with gentleness and love. If we believe that the Bible is true, that the gospel is true, then we have to challenge these other worldviews that lead to death. Because we love, we have to challenge these faulty and false worldviews. We have to do our best to expose their error and to present the beautiful gospel of Jesus Christ as a much better, much more valid alternative. And so it's important for us to remember that we're not the only ones who have to give an answer for our worldview. The atheist has to give an answer for his worldview. The Hindu has to give an answer for his worldview. The Muslim has to give an answer for his worldview. And we have every right and responsibility to ask those good questions, which leads us into our next point. While these questions and these tests can be a helpful framework to operate out of, they are not a cookie cutter argument to throw at people. If you just try and take this and just try and force it upon somebody, it's not going to go well. Cookie cutter arguments don't go very far, in my experience. So become an expert questioner. Listen well. Don't just listen to respond. Don't pretend you're listening while you're really thinking of how that argument was framed up so that you can say it better. Genuinely listen. Think well. See where there's gaps in the reasoning. See what maybe led someone to become an atheist. Was there a tragedy in their life? Did they lose a child? And out of their anger and disbelief that a loving God would allow that to happen, they decided to become an atheist. Okay, well, because I listened to that story, because I'm thinking, well, then maybe I don't need to hit them with getting after the science and the archaeology of carbon dating and things like that, and getting into the science of it, because maybe it's not a science issue. Maybe it's an issue of trying to figure out how a good and loving God would allow something so horrible like a child dying. And that's maybe what we need to press into. That'd be an issue on the problem of pain. And we'll talk about that a little bit more next week. But we need to listen well, we need to think well, and then we need to question well. Okay? Taking that same example, if this person is saying there is no God because of some tragedy that they've gone into, that they've gone through, then it's not the best question to say, have you read about some of the problems with carbon dating? No, they probably never have. They probably have had very little genuine interaction with legitimate scientific scholarship. They're probably hurting and trying to make sense of something really difficult. And that would not be the best question to ask. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that next week on how we would handle that, but listen well, genuinely listen well, think well, and question well. And then last thing here, remember. I cannot say it enough, and I have to say it to myself often. Remember that winning the argument does not equal winning the soul. I have been in way too many conversations, and I repent to the Lord for it, in which I got more wrapped up in winning the argument, and I lost sight of winning the soul to Jesus. Our aim is not to proudly crush an opposing view, but to show the reason and the value for trusting in the one true God. That's what we're after. We're after showing people and proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. We're about showing the kingdom, giving the kingdom, offering the kingdom, if people would repent and believe in Jesus. It is not about crushing some other worldview. Remember, we are after winning the soul, not winning the argument. So there we go. Little bit of maybe just a framework and some thoughts on how to engage with different worldviews. Hopefully that's helpful for you, and we'll have some more assignments throughout the week to really help solidify this. So blessings this week. I miss you guys. Love you.